Hey everybody, it's CBJ with your WWE Elimination Chamber 2013 recap. It was a night of surprises. Some you might have expected, a few that I'm pretty sure you didn't. The pre-show match, however, wasn't a surprise. Brodus Clay and Tensai won the match with a double splash on the Rhodes Scholars. Wasn't a bad match, wasn't a good match. It was just there. It was there to warm up the crowd before the actual pay-per-view got underway. And I'm pretty sure that was it for the pre-show. People started dropping like flies on the YouTube feed, and I didn't see anything worth staying tuned for either. So I stopped there and waited for the pre-show that was on the Barker channel to end, and then the pay-per-view began in earnest. And I want to give a shout out to the people who were following my pay-per-view recap on Twitter. Mosey Dews, Akalis, You Can Get This, among others. Thank you all for being part of the Angry Marks Nation tonight. The first pay-per-view match was for the World Heavyweight title, The Big Show and Alberto Del Rio. Del Rio won this match. I'm sure you didn't expect anything different, but Big Show was pretty dominant early in the match. He was throwing his hammer fists and knife-edge chops, the old frying pan hands, as good old JR used to say. But Del Rio was able to survive. One of the funnier moments was when they each tried to do somebody else's finisher. Alberto Del Rio did a super kick, and Big Show did a spear. Neither one got more than a 2 count. So basically, Del Rio needs to not do Shawn Michaels' finisher, and Big Show needs to not do Edge's, and they will both be better off. The finish to the match came when Big Show powered up and slammed Del Rio to break an arm breaker, and Del Rio went for it a third time, but this time he finally had Big Show in the middle of the ring and he couldn't get away and he tapped out. Next up was Antonio Cesaro versus The Miz for the United States title. To make a long story short, Antonio Cesaro retains here, and as a member of Team Swiss, I'm quite happy about that. Shout out to Booker T 2003, who tweeted Team Swiss with me. Hashtag Team Swiss. I've been a Claudio Castagnoli fan for years, so they can tell me The Miz is the babyface in this match, and I'm still going to cheer for Claudio. As a matter of fact, I think most people would too, because The Miz has been admitting in every single interview that even though people cheer for him now, he really didn't change his character at all. Seriously? Or as The Miz would say, really? Really? That doesn't make you a babyface. If you do the exact same things you did as a heel and just say that people like you now, you're not a babyface, Miz. You still suck. So I'm glad Claudio retains here. We started with Jack Swagger. Next out was Kane. Oh, I should note that Zeb Coulter got in the ring with Swagger to give a long-ass promo about America for Americans and how Thomas Jefferson would be disappointed in what the Louisiana Purchase has turned into, basically trying to rile the crowd up in New Orleans, and he did a decent job of it. Third to come out was Mark Henry, and the fourth to come out was Randy Orton, and that means Daniel Bryan and Chris Jericho were the two that started this match off. First man to come out of a pod was Jack Swagger. Second man to come out was Kane. Third man to come out was Randy Orton. And the fourth man to come out was Mark Henry. So there were no eliminations until Henry entered the match. It turned into a big cluster with 6 men in the cage. But Mark Henry made sure that didn't last long. He pinned Daniel Bryan almost immediately. Then he sent Randy Orton headfirst through a pod. Remember how they used to call those pods unbreakable bulletproof glass? I think we've shattered that myth now, no pun intended. So Orton went headfirst through a pod and it was destroyed. Then Henry pinned Kane and we were down to 4 men. Jericho and Swagger decided to double team on Mark Henry and suplexed him right onto his steel grate. And to their credit, they both started selling afterward like they had injured themselves worse than Henry. And then our next elimination was Chris Jericho hitting Mark Henry with a code breaker and Orton hitting him with an RKO and getting the pin. So it took 2 men to get Mark Henry out. Henry left the cage very slowly and reluctantly, and then said, screw it, and got back in the cage and laid out every single person with a slam, which caused 6 different referees to come down to the ring and surround him, and good old Peanut Head himself, Teddy Long, and Booker T. And Booker T was admonishing him and yelling at him and screaming at him. And Henry got out of the cage, and Booker T kept yelling at him all the way up the ramp. Booker T should be pissed off that Mark Henry's not obeying the rules and should be laying down the law and lecturing him. And good on him. Good salesmanship of believability on everybody's part for that. So we're down to Swagger, Jericho, and Orton. And Swagger tries to give everybody the Patriot Act, but nobody's going to tap out to it. Jericho blocked an RKO, but missed with a Lion Salt and got hit with an RKO, and Jericho was pinned by Orton. You might have thought that was going to be a good thing, but Swagger immediately rolled up Orton and got the pin. So believe it or not, Jack Swagger is going to WrestleMania to face Alberto Del Rio. Now, if you think about it, it actually does kind of make sense. If you're going to do a heel gimmick of Americans for America and have Zeb Coulter out there cutting promos about how this used to be a great country, but now I don't recognize people and I don't understand their language, well, then you got the perfect foil for Alberto Del Rio, the babyface Mexican champion, going up against the heel Americans for America Jack Swagger. I probably should have seen that coming, but I didn't. But it all makes sense. I like the idea. Jack Swagger and Alberto Del Rio at Mania. Whether people feel Jack Swagger is ready for this role or not, I don't know. But guess what? They've got 7 weeks to figure it out. They're going to have 7 weeks of Jack Swagger and Alberto Del Rio getting into it, and it's going to work. I think it's going to be a good match at WrestleMania. So, moving on with our card. The Shield versus Ryback, John Cena, and Sheamus. Now, you might have expected John Cena was going to win this match and have a big head of steam going into WrestleMania as the conquering hero who finally defeated the Shield. But that's not actually what happened. We got our second surprise of the night. It was a long time before Ryback got tagged into this match because Cena got beat up forever by the Shield. But when he finally did get in, he of course cleaned house on everybody in sight, which is what you'd expect a powerhouse like Ryback to do. But this didn't last long. It turned into a cluster. Sheamus jumped in and tried to clean house, but he ended up on the outside with Roman Reigns and got speared through the barricade. Then Seth Rollins tried a crossbody. Ryback caught him. A low blow saved Rollins. Cena hit the ring, and Ryback got hit with a spear while he had Seth Rollins in the air for the shell shock. And then Ryback got pinned for 3, and the Shield won. I'm sure the IWC was rejoicing. Dolph Ziggler came out to complain that he hadn't been booked on the pay-per-view. Booker T said, you know what, you want some competition? I got some competition. I got a man who's your equal in every way, and sent Kofi Kingston down to the ring, who had a very short match and got beaten with a zigzag after he got slammed into the turnbuckle. So, Kofi didn't really look like competition for Dolph Ziggler on this night, and to make things worse for him, Big E Langston hit the ring to beat him up. But you know what? Kofi Kingston is getting a pay-per-view bonus just for being in the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, so even if he loses, he still wins. This led to a backstage segment where Brodus Clay and the Funkadactyls were playing with those new action figures that you wind up and they wrestle each other. And Tensai was called Sweet Tea by Brodus Clay and didn't like it. He thought it was a terrible nickname. And Brodus Clay asked him what all that stuff on his face meant anyway. And Tensai had the first funny thing he said since his babyface turn. He said that it's supposed to be Japanese words of honor, but, quote, with my luck, it's a sushi menu. You know what? If Tensai's going to say things like that, I can get behind his babyface turn. He got a slap on the butt from a Funkadactyl who told him to lighten up and have some fun. Brodus Clay said to hit the music, and they all started dancing together. So it was a good little backstage segment to kill some time. And speaking of time killers, Caitlyn versus Tamina Snuka in the worst match of the night. Snuka beat her up for 3.5 minutes. Caitlyn hit 1 spear and pinned her for 3. Seriously? Okay. Even Dave Meltzer on a 5-star scale would give that a dud. That was terrible. The main event was The Rock versus CM Punk, which was your typical everything and the kitchen sink world title match that you would expect, with the added bonus that The Rock had to be really careful not to get disqualified or he'd lose the title. So, of course, Punk was trying to goad him every step of the way, including hawking a humongous loogie right into the middle of his forehead. I think most people would have punched somebody so hard they'd have gotten disqualified for that. And The Rock did try. He wailed on him a couple of times. Each time got a warning from the ref not to do it for more than a 5 count or he would be DQ'd. And Paul Heyman as the Weasley manager was just perfect here. Screaming out encouragement to CM Punk every time he got a near fall. He'd say, "That's 1.5. That's 2. That's 2.5." Like, inevitably it was going to get to 3. That was the whole idea you were supposed to draw from it. So God bless Paul Heyman. Whether you consider him a walrus or not, he is a great heel manager. He plays his role to the hilt. So this match went anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes before we started to get to the finish. Punk put The Rock on the announce table and gave him a rock bottom. The ref started a count out, which meant The Rock would lose the title if he got counted out or DQ'd. That was the stip. But he recovered and got back in before 10. And then both men wound up down, but Punk got up before 9. The Rock did a flying clothesline and a DDT and started shouting at Punk. He's looking for the rock bottom. Punk countered with elbows to the back of the Rock's neck to block it. And JBL called this the perfect game plan, which was his catchphrase for the night. He also said the Shield had a perfect game plan in their match. Sometimes JBL just gets locked into these cliches and just can't stop saying them for all the tea in China. Speaking of cliches. So anyway, Punk goes for a springboard and gets countered into a rock bottom, and the Rock collides with the ref. Punk hits a go to sleep, but there's no referee to count it. So he had a visual pin on the Rock. Whether that means anything after this, I can't say, but they did actually do it during this pay-per-view. The Rock hits a spine buster and the people's elbow. Punk kicks out at 2 9/10. So what's left? It's 10:50. There's only 10 minutes left at the top of the hour. Punk kicks Rock in the head. Nobody's there to see him make the cover because the ref got knocked down again. The second ref this time got an ankle clipped. So Paul Heyman goes over and gives CM Punk the WWE title, then pulls the Rock up and holds his arms back through the ropes. But as CM Punk charges, the Rock ducks. Punk clocks Heyman. He goes down. And then Punk gets laid out by The Rock, and the ref crawls in and makes the count 1, 2, 3. The Rock retains the WWE title, and that's how the Elimination Chamber ends. I'm your recapper, Stevie J from AngryMarks.com.